for our Coaching for the Millennial Generation with the MBTI Tool webinar. My name is Kim Rivera, and I am the Associate Marketing Manager here at CPP. I'll be moderating today's webinar. Today's webinar will run for approximately 90 minutes. During the presentation, if you have any questions, please submit them to me using the question function in the webinar controls. Sandra will be pausing throughout the webinar today to answer your questions. Two representatives from CPP's education team are also in attendance, Jim Larkin and Jack Powers, and they'll be available to answer questions as well. As with all of our webinars, today's webinar is being recorded, and we'll be sending out the link to the recording in the next few days. Please note that the PowerPoint slides are not available for our Ask an Expert series. It's time for our contest. We have a special giveaway today, which is our very popular ebook on relationships and conflict. We printed a very limited quantity, and I'm giving away five of the top tweeters today. Here are the rules. Follow us at CPP Education on Twitter. Use the hashtag CPPAAE in all tweets, as this is how we can track your tweets. Share relevant and quality content, and have fun and learn a lot. The contest will end today at 1 p.m. Pacific and 4 p.m. Eastern Time. The winners will be announced through Twitter. Now, I'm very happy to welcome, as CPP's Ask an Expert, Sandra Stroop. Sandra is a Human Resource Manager at Intermountain Healthcare. She has 20 years of experience creating HR and development solutions that align with business strategy and achieve results in a variety of industries at global and Fortune 500 companies. Sandra has published over a dozen works and contributed the chapter Career Development to engage and retain high potential emerging leaders to integrated talent management scorecards. So please join me in welcoming Sandra as I turn over the webinar to her. Welcome, Sandra.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. What we're going to do today is we're going to focus in on generational differences and appreciating those differences and the impact they can have on career choices and career development. We'll focus in on Generation Y, or the millennial generation, and talk about some key skills that they need to be successful in the workplace. We'll talk about some tips for communicating and coaching across generations and coaching Generation Y. Leveraging the Myers-Briggs assessment in your coaching sessions to help millennials communicate effectively and make effective career choices. And then we'll pinpoint some strategies for engaging Gen Y, or the millennial generation, in the workplace. And, you know, this webinar was really suggested at one of our previous sessions, and so what we want to do today is really focus in on some of the questions that were raised in an earlier webinar and answer some of the questions about Generation Y. So first of all, there's a storm brewing in the workplace. What's in it? A variety of diverse generations that have very different views about career development. A significant drop in qualified available talent. This is the kind of conversation that you have every day in the workplace. One of the skills in the workplace for human resources is to be able to help leaders find the right people for the right position at the right time. And there's a lack in the availability of talent that have the right experience, the right kind of skills, or experience within the industry. There's a technology revolution happening, and it's not slowing down. We're operating in a global marketplace, so more than ever, we're dealing with diverse populations across the globe with different cultures, different expectations, even different rules and regulations for operating in the workplace. And then we have the economic downturn. So this creates quite a challenging work environment, and something that, you know, quite honestly, a lot of organizations are not prepared for. When we focus in on the generations, this slide demonstrates the generational challenge. We have three primary generations in the workplace today. the baby boomers, Generation X, and Generation Y. And this slide is based on the work of executive development associates in a book called Decades of Differences. It's illustrating the shift in the demographics. So what you can see is the number of births in each generation is dramatically different. There's quite a significant drop from the baby boomer generation to Generation X. This has also been referred to as the generational parade. So if you think of this as a parade line, we have the very beginning of the line. If we go back to the GI generation and the silent generation, which is already finished with the parade, and they're dispersing, they're exiting the workplace. And then we have the pace moving pretty quickly with the baby boomers, and then a slowdown with Generation X. And then Generation Y is just beginning to form back at the fairgrounds. So Generation Y is just coming into the workplace. And you know, you can also think about this as a supply chain problem that sometimes we experience in organizations. We just don't have the available supply of talent right now that's ready to take the place of the baby boomers who are approaching retirement. So why focus on the generations? The baby boomers are retiring. The majority of leaders in organizations are in the baby boomer generation, and the average age is about 58 years old. There are fewer Gen Xers than baby boomers, 11% fewer. And Generation Y, 27 and under, for the most part, they won't be management or leadership material for years to come. Research has shown that each generation brings their own views towards career development and their own expectations about work. So appreciating those differences along with individual differences, like personality differences, can help us engage and develop future leaders. Is there really a generation gap? Are they really so much different? What we're going to do is watch a brief video, and this video illustrates some of the thinking of Generation Y.
Drive their parents and their employers crazy.
Some of you ask for vacations and your first 2 months of working here. Now, your bosses, boomers, they don't understand that at all.
Joe Muse holds monthly meetings with the young employees at his Hollywood advertising firm, trying to better understand the generational tug of war between them and their older bosses.
Why do you think that you can work places for a couple months and then get a vacation? And unpaid. You don't care if you get paid. What's up with that? I don't understand it.
See, we're bred on like MTV and seeing some media and magazines, and you see Lindsay Lohan, who's 19, and she makes this amount of money, and she spends weekends in San Tropez, and then you have Puffy, who's 35, who's a multimillionaire, and you have all those are heroes. So the idea of working 10 years at a mediocre job to possibly have 3 or 4 weeks of vacation is not everything that we've ever experienced in terms of growing up has been microwavable. And what we're striving for is to be millionaires and fantastic successful by the age of 40.
30.
You know?
I'm betting the farm that your parents have spoiled you, at least your bosses think that way, because of the sense of entitlement. You're thinking that you have to have everything that you want, and you got to have it now. You'll submit yourself to the authority, but you give the sense immediately that we ain't the boss of you. And boomers recognize that the boss is the boss. So what's that all about?
Well, I think the difference is now the boomers, they let their job define them a lot. So that's all they did. Where now, we do so many other things. We have so many choices. My job doesn't define who I am.
News Communications is not alone trying to cope with the arrival of Generation Next in the workplace. Companies large and small are faced with the unique demands and contributions of their younger employees.
We multitask, and we have a lot of side things that we do. At the same time, I think A lot of people are very idealistic, and they're going to college and they're graduating, they're crying in the roof because they can't find a job that gives them meaning and purpose in life.
Okay, so that video illustrates some of the different thinking that Generation Y and the millennial generation bring into the workplace. If we think about the differences between the different generations, our views in a lot of ways are shaped by our experiences. If we go back to the traditional veteran or silent generation, that generation experienced the Great Depression. So when we think about their views towards work, they valued hard work. They were willing to sacrifice. They thought of work as an obligation, a duty, and expected to fill that application before having fun. To them, no news was good news, and they were loyal to the employer. When it came to the baby boomer population, they experienced the civil rights movement, the first man on the moon, the Vietnam War. They tend to be viewed as more of a workaholic generation and live to work. So they do think of work as an adventure. They like feedback in terms of money, title, and recognition. They question authority, but they're willing to crusade a cause. Generation X, on the other hand, in their experience, this was the first generation with both working parents in a lot of cases. We had a lot of latchkey kids. They experienced the rise of the dot-coms and new technology, the moon landing, MTV, and Watergate. So they tend to take a more independent view and tend to be more skeptical of the organization. They view work as a contract. And they're loyal to themselves and their career, their profession. They want structure and direction, but they tend to operate a little bit more independently and tend to work to live. And now Generation Y, or the millennial generation, in their experience, they've experienced September 11th, the first African-American president, the financial meltdowns, reality TV, and lots of technology. So they tend to be very effective with multitasking, communicating with multiple technologies, email, voicemail, cell phone, text messages, and they expect immediate feedback. So whenever I want it at a push of a button, I expect to be able to communicate or have feedback. They want career options and fulfillment and work-life balance. So this chart indicates some of the key differences in different perspectives that the generation brings. When we focus in on Gen Y, they're plugged in. So TV isn't the king. They're used to all different kinds of technology. Work isn't their whole world. They want employers who will further their development as professionals. They tend to not participate in a traditional chain of command kind of organizational structure. They don't care about the ad. They care about what their friends think. They rely on their network of friends and recommendations. And they respond to the truth, the unvarnished truth. They don't have brand loyalty. They're quick to move on to the next big thing. Some of the common themes that we've seen in the research and the literature, globalization and the internet gives them almost limitless boundaries. They tend to be more high maintenance in terms of expecting immediate feedback, immediate response. They're used to that and used to the technology, and also high performance. And they tend to watch reality TV shows. In terms of the values in a work environment, they want challenges and respect, constant feedback, direct statements on what needs improvement and how you expect it to be done, leaders with honesty and integrity, and flexible schedules that allow them to work side by side with friends in a collaborative, fun, and creative manner. When it comes to career development and coaching, any generation, and especially with this Generation Y millennial population, it's important to be very clear about the framework that you're going to use, the process you're going to use, and roles, so that they understand that they own their career plan, that they are responsible for taking action, and that really it's up to them to move forward with their career plan. You can use a number of different assessments that will help define 4 pieces: their interests, what they're really passionate about, what engages them, what they really want to do at work, their style, and their style might encompass their generational preferences as well as their Myers-Briggs preferences and other behavioral styles at work, their values, what's really important to them, and then the skills, experiences, and competencies that they want to develop or those that they're really good at. All of this information should be captured into a career development plan with a specific place to record action items. And you want to take a look back at this frequently to look at actions that are completed and measure the impact. What I want to do here is pause just to see if we have any questions so far about the generations.
Yes, so Sandra, we do have 2 questions. The first one, what defined the time frame for the generations?
Okay, sure. The time frames, sometimes depending upon the book or the article that you reference, sometimes you can find slight variations in the dates. But we tend to think of their traditional generation, that veteran or silent generation, which for the most part is exiting or has already exited the workforce, as those people being born between 1922 and 1945. The baby boomer generation includes those individuals born between 1946 and 1964. Generation X, roughly 1965 to 1980. And then Generation Y, or the millennial generation, born between 1981 and the year 2000.
Okay.
And as I mentioned, sometimes those dates vary slightly depending on which article, but it's always within 1 or 2 years of that general time frame.
Okay, thank you. And the next question, what do you mean Gen Y, non-participative in chain of command organization structure, and can you give an example?
Yeah, so, where we might think the baby boomer generation is a bit more respectful of authority and used to working in a corporate environment that's very hierarchical, Generation Y is very comfortable working in teams in a more collaborative environment. They've grown up in school being taught that way to work in teams and team projects. And so what I tend to see a lot, if I think about some of my own experiences with Generation Y and those students first entering into the workforce, not having a lot of work experience, is they tend to not understand that within some corporate cultures it's not okay just to send an email to the CEO, that you might want to go through multiple levels of approval before sending that message to someone higher in the organization. That's a little bit of an exaggeration, but sometimes Gen Y needs more specific coaching around your culture within your organization. If your organization tends to be more formal or more hierarchical, as to what levels of approval need to happen first, or who needs to see communications first before they're just sent out. If we think about texting and Facebook and social media, they're very used to just sending information to those who need to know, and may make some missteps by not following the traditional chain of command unknowingly. Now, there are some organizations out there that have different cultures that are very flat, very team-oriented, and so it's important to coach Gen Y around, first of all, asking some questions to understand the culture within the organization, and also to coach if they're expected to follow a chain of command or operate within a hierarchical organization, what might be expected with their communications? Are there any other questions, Kim?
Yeah, we have another question if you have time to answer.
Sure.
Okay, the question is, do you find gender-based differences among the Gen Yers?
I have not seen any research in particular on that that's particular to Gen Y and gender differences, and I haven't noticed that in my own experience. I have seen some research that shows gender differences in relationship to some of the Myers-Briggs preferences. And so I might think, you know, if you're noticing some gender differences or you suspect that there might be gender differences, that it might actually be related to their personality preference. That we know that about 60% of females are feelers on the Myers-Briggs. So, you know, just a hunch here, but my guess is that if it's a style difference, that it might be more related to personality and gender versus generation. So this is probably a good time to move on, and we'll come back and have additional time for questions later. So let's focus in on this piece of the puzzle around career related to skills, experience, and competencies. So what are some of the key skills that Gen Y needs to develop? Some of the key skills that I have seen that are especially in need of attention for Gen Y are communication skills and writing skills when it comes to communication. Self-awareness, financial acumen, and critical thinking and problem solving. So focusing in on these skills can help Gen Y be more successful moving into leadership roles or moving into the workforce for the first time. When it comes to communication and writing skills, we've already talked about this a bit. Each organization has its own unique culture, and they have their own expectations with regard to communication. We need to keep in mind that Gen Y has grown up with technology, text messaging, and answers at the push of a button. So it's important to be clear about what kind of communication is expected, what's acceptable, how much information is expected, how much supporting documentation and research is expected within your organization. Or is it okay to send someone who might be at a higher level a text message or a question? The pace of blogs, social media, and technology has led to a deterioration of spelling and grammar. I actually worked in an organization that as part of their culture, they sent out information to all leaders and all employees about the use of proper grammar. So it's important to talk about that and talk about what's expected, especially also within a global organization, whether it's English grammar and spelling that we're going to utilize, or Australian grammar and spelling that we're going to utilize, because it is different. And it's important to be real clear about those expectations. Clarifying approval levels, methods of communication, whether the preference is phone, email, a more formal proposal, the format and the level of information required. It's very important to be clear about that. When it comes to self-awareness, Myers-Briggs is actually a tool that you can utilize to help Gen Yers build self-awareness. We need to keep in mind within the last 20 years, organizations have relaxed the rules. They've offered greater flexibility with hours, work locations, and dress codes. So clarifying guidelines about what's expected when it comes to managing professional image, things like dress code, and exactly what it means to dress appropriately within the organization. There's a difference between business casual and casual wear, and there's a difference in terms of what organizations allow. Some organizations allow casual wear every day, whereas others are more conservative and don't allow wearing jeans at all. And sometimes we forget to talk about those things, particularly if we have an organization where we have a lot of long-term employees. Sometimes we just assume that new people coming in would know these things. So it's important to communicate about them. It's also important to enforce policies consistently related to dress code, work hours, conduct in meetings, and work location. So being very clear about whether or not telecommuting is acceptable. Is it okay to take a laptop home and work from home if I'm not feeling okay? Is it okay to be late for meetings? What's the impact of being late for a meeting more than once? How might that impact my future career within an organization? And if these are things that people within the organization are taking for granted, the coaching for the Gen Y-er might be to go into the organization asking questions and really observing so that they are aware that there are differences within different cultures. Financial acumen is the next skill that we've seen being really important to Gen Y. They saw the World Trade Center fall, and they found a job in a tough economy. They've grown up with gadgets and frequent upgrades. According to financial advisors, it appears as though they would rather spend than save. So when it comes to skills like managing a budget in the workplace, you might think about tools and resources that can help them with financial management, or suggest that they have routine meetings with a person in the finance department. Those kind of things can help drive financial acumen. They also might want to get a better perspective from their manager or others in the organization as to how the organization views spending money. Again, different organizations have different cultures. So in some organizations, you're allowed to stay at a 5-star hotel when you travel. In other organizations, there is a limit on the budget, and the expectation is a 3-star hotel. So, being very clear about those kind of expectations can be really helpful. Critical thinking and problem solving is the next skill. Within organizations, people and departmental boundaries are not always clear. So although we want to solve the problem and come up with a solution, textbook step-by-step answers may not work in a complex situation where we need to involve key people, or we have perhaps departments with competing budgets or competing priorities. So research shows that Generation Y enjoys a team approach, and that's a good thing because they're good at collaborating, but they may need more information about those boundaries and about how problems are approached within an organization. And there are critical thinking training courses and critical thinking tools that can be helpful with alternative approaches to problem solving when Plan A doesn't work, or my first solution to the problem it isn't solving it. There are also quality improvement programs that offer a lot of thinking tools that can be helpful for thinking through and solving problems, even thinking through things like who are the key stakeholders, who do I need to involve in this decision. Some of the common areas of friction between the generations center around respect, decision-making processes, and approaches at work. This is also an area where Myers-Briggs might come into play depending on their preference for thinking versus feeling. Ethics around things like having fun at work, how much fun at work is acceptable, and are we allowed to play all day long, or do we play after the work is done? Communication, the kind of communication and frequency that's expected, Meetings, the frequency of meetings, who's involved, whether it's appropriate to be late for meetings, or if the expectation is to be on time. Policies such as dress code, loyalty to the organization, and the frequency of feedback and what kind of feedback is giving. Oftentimes, we kind of joke about it that most of us have a disease called Be Like Me. It's a whole lot easier to relate to people who are like me. They might be similar in personality type, similar in generation, but I tend to understand them more easily and reach agreement more easily. I experience conflict or friction when someone is different from me. But we can't really lead the generations until we stop trying to change them. So it's important that we appreciate our differences and our different strengths and make an effort to communicate effectively and resolve some of these areas of conflict. As a starting point, it may be helpful for the Generation Y to be coached to ask questions about things like dress code. Is it a preference or is it a strict policy? To really understand what the requirements are. When it comes to working across generations, anytime there's any doubt, the key thing is building relationships and building trust. So just like in any relationship, some of the things that Generation Y can do and others can do to build the relationship are having discussion, recognizing and appreciating strengths, offering support, collaborating, disclosing information, sharing information, being direct if you have questions or have information to share or feedback to offer, valuing differences, helping others, really acknowledging where there is a difference, sharing information and asking questions where there are questions. So when in doubt, there are 10 trust builders to go to that always can be helpful. It might also be helpful to discuss learning styles. So Generation Y, the millennial generation, grew up with a more interactive learning style in classrooms. They've been brought up working in groups and teams and with lots of technology. Gen X also is familiar with computer-based learning, role-playing to practice skills, and comfortable with immediate feedback and coaching. The baby boomer generation learned in a variety of formats and participated in teams as well. And then when it came to the veteran, mature, silent generation, it was more traditional classroom learning, lectures by the expert. The information tended to be viewed as non-emotional information and organized in terms of facts, research, figures. When it comes to communication across the generations, using clear and direct language is always helpful. Using I language versus you. Instead of talking about, wow, you were late for that meeting and it really looked bad, that sounds very accusatory and very language, very accusatory and blaming. You might rephrase that as, I noticed that you came in about 10:20 and the meeting started at 10. Here's what I think about that. So using the I language can be really helpful. Matching your verbal and nonverbal messages, asking clarifying questions versus leading questions so that the questions are open to gathering information, seeking out the thoughts of others, and accepting their frame of reference is true for them. You may not agree with it, but that's their experience of the situation. Building on others' ideas, thoughts, and feelings, keeping the big picture and the broader goals in mind. So one of the things that's important in working in an organization and in teams is that we know what our common purpose is. Showing and care and respect for the other person, maintaining confidentiality, and having the tough conversations, the relationship will benefit. It absolutely doesn't work if you ignore some of the things that you're noticing. You know, for example, if there's something about the dress code, an example I've seen within an organization is someone coming in with a hoodie on and thinking that's acceptable business casual. And within that particular work environment, hoodies just weren't allowed. But if we don't talk about it, the individual won't know and they'll continue that behavior. So it may be a tough conversation. We may have emotional reactions, but preparing for that conversation, using the appropriate language, showing that you care about the person and you want them to be successful. When it comes to coaching across the generations, it's helpful to think about the generation and customize the plan based upon what's important to them. Using those 4 corners that we talked about in a career plan can be really helpful, but you do want to focus in on what's most important to them. Offer peer-level examples. So if there's another Generation Y employee that's been really successful in the workplace, or maybe it's just successful with a particular skill, perhaps they've made a really thorough decision and involved all the key parties, or you know, used another budgeting tool. What you want to do is provide role models and examples at that peer level that they can reach out to for help and support. Spend time providing guidance and provide feedback. So one of the models for providing feedback is to communicate what you like first, then explain the parts that you're concerned about, and then make suggestions for addressing them. So it might sound something like this. I really liked that you took the initiative to change the agenda for the meeting. I have some concerns that you didn't let me know about it before the meeting. It caught me by surprise. What I would suggest is next time that you make those kind of improvements, send me an email prior to the meeting so I know what to expect. It might be as simple as that. So again, thinking about the generations and what's important to them. With Gen Y, the millennial generation, having the interaction and the feedback, answering the question why the information is important, focusing in on their career path, providing access to information, solving problems, and focusing in on results. With Gen X, focusing on skills, offering opportunities for professional development and learning new skills. With the baby boomers, they enjoy opportunities for teamwork, a personable atmosphere. Don't forget about them when it comes to additional training, and allow them to contribute. And then with the traditionalist generation, don't count them out. They can be great mentors and others can learn from their experience. So I'd like to pause again here just to see if there are any quick questions before we jump into the Myers-Briggs.
Okay, yeah, we do have a couple questions, and we've been receiving some questions in regards to the slides. Please note that the webinar is being recorded and will be posted to our website in the next few days, and we'll be sending a follow-up link to that. So in regards to some questions that are coming in, we have one asking, college debt is a big issue these days. Some are skeptical that college and grad school may not really help a person in their career. Has the workplace far outpaced college content?
You know, I think that's always been a question. If I think back to my own experience, I was one of those individuals that went straight through graduate school, and I wondered, is this really going to have an impact? So I think there's always been a question.
Sandra, if you could just speak up a little bit there. Sorry about that.
Okay. You know, so I think that has always been a question to some extent, you know, in terms of the debt and the investment in education. I think sometimes it depends upon the organizational culture. But, you know, I do think depending on the career choice of the individual, there is some great value in terms of having an additional education, having graduate degrees, college degrees, and certifications. I've seen in my own experience, because of this focus on talent and getting the right people in the right place at the right time, I've seen a couple of organizations that I have worked for really look at the requirements for positions and increase the requirements to include further education or certifications and the maintenance of those certifications. So I see a lot of organizations taking a closer look at that and actually you know, increasing the qualifications that are needed for positions to ensure that they have individuals in those positions who can perform, particularly in leadership roles.
Okay, and Sandra, again, your mic is going in and out just a touch, so if you can adjust that for us. And we have another question. Joel is asking how awareness of an employee's MBTI and using MBTI-specific language sets the manager up for success in communicating expectations.
Okay, you know, I think that's a great question, and I think the Myers-Briggs can be really helpful in terms of communicating with each other because it helps you communicate in a manner that's received if you understand someone's personality preference. So, you know, I think knowing someone's preference and their personality type can really help you ensure that you're communicating specifically and effectively for someone. You know, for example, if they're an NF, you might communicate differently than if they're an ST. You know, an ST might want more specific details and more information. The NF might want to understand more about the big picture. Why is the dress code important? You know, why does this organization value dress code? It may be that we're trying to create a certain perception for our customers within the organization. So let's dive into that a little bit further. We're just about to go into the Myers-Briggs, so I think we'll touch on that more as we get into the next few slides. So were there other questions right now, or would it be most appropriate to move on, Kim?
Oh, you can definitely move on for now. Thank you.
Okay, so I think we'll talk a little bit more about communication in this section around the Myers-Briggs. So one of the key things that you can do with the Myers-Briggs is you can really leverage this to help understand the strengths of the Generation Y people that you're working with, their development areas, and help them understand the impact that they're having on others that they work with. Knowledge of type can really also help them define the kind of work, the role, and the tasks that best fit for them if they're in the process as a student of making that career choice. So how can it help? Myers-Briggs is all about personality type, and our type impacts the way that we approach decisions. It impacts our communication with others. It can also help increase their self-awareness and their own awareness of their strengths and their development areas. And we can use that information to communicate and work effectively with others, understand some of those differences that might lead to conflict, and leverage that information to help make effective career choices. So when it comes to behavior in the workplace, generation is a big part of it that impacts our behavior, but personality type is also a huge part of it, along with things like our educational level, our experience, our values, our motivations, and lots of other things that have impact on our behavior. So when it comes to Myers-Briggs, it's really about valuing those differences. One of the key things that you can do as you're coaching students or coaching Generation Y employees in the workplace, is have conversations with them about their personality type and what they might find frustrating about working with someone who is their opposite preference or different from them with their generation or other differences as well. What they admire about their opposite preference and other generations, and how those differences might impact the way they work together as a team. And then talk about agreements that they might need to make about working with other people. Also, when it comes to looking at the Myers-Briggs preferences, I find it's helpful to sometimes look at the two-letter combinations. So I mentioned earlier focusing on the NF. So for an example, someone with an NF preference, they tend to communicate by focusing on what could be the possibilities, the big picture, focusing on ideals and values worth striving for, and they really value encouragement and empowerment. So when communicating with someone with an NF style, it may be helpful to really focus on, you know, why this is really important, what the big picture is, why we have this dress code, how it impacts our image with the customers, and you know, see if you can understand what their values are and help them relate to the policy or issue that they have questions about by focusing in on the values and the big picture. Compared to the ST style, it might be focusing more on the facts. What is the policy, the procedure, and bottom line around being efficient and being effective and perhaps being viewed as an effective employee within the organization. With the SF preference, they tend to focus on internal and external customer service. Again, fact-oriented, but they really value helping others and offering support. And then with the NT combination, focusing on the big picture, what could be, but they also tend to think in terms of theoretical concepts. And they value logical principles and systems thinking. So explaining the logic behind the behavior or the policy, the information that you're sharing might be really helpful. When it comes to resolving tension in the workplace, again, the two-letter combinations are helpful to look at. So with an NT preference, making sure principles are sound is a way to help reduce conflict. With the NF, it's articulating the values clearly, that we really value our customers, and so we want to create a professional image for our customers. The STs having a structure in place, and with the SF combination, that we're meeting people's needs. So this kind of communication focused in on the personality preferences can really help reduce some of that conflict. And then when people are working together in teams, there are actions that you can take that will really help all preferences be successful. So for example, when we're thinking about the E and the I preference and working in teams, you can let people know in advance what issues you'll be discussing and that you'll be soliciting input about brainstorming. That will allow the introverts to think it over before the meeting. You can encourage introverts to think it over and take notes. You can try going around the room one at a time, asking for ideas, prevent extroverts from blurting out and dominating the discussion, and preventing introverts from keeping ideas to themselves. You also want to facilitate the conversation so the extroverts don't move to action too quickly, and you allow the introverts to get all of their ideas out. Looking at the sensing and intuitive preferences, some of the actions that you might take in a group setting are asking for facts, the data, the history, the situational analysis, as well as the interpretation of it. So what does this all mean? Asking for possible solutions, plans, and goals. Placing goals and objectives in the context of the overall mission and vision, asking for qualitative and quantitative measurements, preventing intuitives from moving forward before the facts are settled, and then preventing sensors from squashing new ideas that are untried or untested or they haven't experienced in the past. When it comes to the thinking and feeling preferences, some of the actions that you might take are encouraging both the analytical consideration of the problem as well as the values. Monitoring the group for the level of harmony and conflict and intervening when appropriate, insisting on dialogues and avoiding personal attacks, and setting up meeting rules or meeting norms in advance to promote constructive problem solving and communication. Even real simple things like reinforcing the rules for brainstorming, that we're going to value all ideas, we're not going to pass judgment, we're going to get all the ideas out within a short time frame. Having rules like that prior to the meeting can help reinforce a positive environment for working together. And then when it comes to the J and the P preference, setting clear plans with small milestones and overall completion dates, but measuring the results and not the methods used when it comes to getting there, sharing all the information up front before making a final decision, and allowing people to have some autonomy and some flexibility when it comes to completing assignments. You want to demonstrate that you believe in their capability and celebrate success along the way. Another tool that I have used in coaching around career that might be particularly helpful with this generation, Generation Y, is what I call the ideal job description. So it goes back to the 4 corners of the career puzzle. First, by helping them identify their interests, what they're really passionate about. The strong interest inventory is an assessment that can be useful for that. Focusing in on the skills, experiences, and competencies that they really want to develop, or the things they do well, and those that they need to learn. Looking at their style, which would include their generation as well as their personality style, their preferences around the work environment, the work that they do, the tasks they perform, and then finally their values, what's important to them in work and life. And we've seen earlier in some of the slides that work-life balance tends to be important to Generation Y. So there are a number of assessments and information you can use to look at these 4 pieces, and then take that information and ask the student or employee to write down an ideal job description. So this slide is an example of what a job description might look like. A brief paragraph around interests, describing what they're passionate about or what they really want to do. A paragraph around the skills and experiences that they want to gain. Paragraph around style, what kind of style do they want to work with, and then a paragraph around values. So for example, putting that all together, it might be that I really want to manage and lead teams to improve process, and I'm going to use some skills around creating statements of work, gathering requirements, managing a budget. I'd like to work in an environment that's slower paced because I want time for research and analysis. And then because I want time with my family and friends, I only want to work 40 hours a week, and I want to limit my travel to 25%. So that's just an example of how you might help someone create an ideal job description. But then there is also some coaching, depending upon the economy, about the ideal job description perhaps might not always be available. So keeping that in perspective with the job offer or the types of jobs that are available and what's realistic out there in the work world. Another tool or way to use the Myers-Briggs in career planning sessions with students or Generation Y employees is to use the Z method for career planning. The Z method is a decision-making method where you utilize the preferences for gathering information and making decisions. So using the sensing and intuitive preference first, and then the thinking and feeling preference. So what this might look like in a career situation is asking the student to look at all the facts and make a list of all their transferable skills and experiences, the things that they might bring to a position. And then focus on their end preference and create a vision for their career in the next 3 to 5 years. And then focus on their thinking preference and think about the rationale for their career choice and the next steps on their action plan. And then to use their feeling preference to think about the values that are important in work and life. And to capture all of that information to help make a good, solid career planning decision. Finally, one of the most effective ways of coaching and communicating with Generation Y is to have a conversation about engagement at work. And this is also something that you can coach students to do at work. If their manager, for example, hasn't talked to them about what's important to them, they might be able to ask some of these questions or raise some of these questions in a conversation with their manager. So talking about things like what's most important to them at work, what they look for in a career, what's inspiring or motivating to them, what kind of appreciation and recognition they need, the frequency, the form that they like to be recognized, what kind of support they need, what's their opinion about leaving an organization, how they feel about rules and regulations, how a person might earn their respect, or that's a good one to ask the manager. How does a person earn the respect from their manager's perspective? How they feel about having fun at work, how decisions are approached, how they feel about giving and receiving feedback, and what their communication preferences are, email, phone, or text messages. So for today's manager, you've got a team of interested, highly talented, highly educated, aggressive, tech-savvy individuals. They're willing to challenge you publicly about the way you do your work. It takes someone who's eager to manage a team that are results-oriented and want a flexible job schedule, and to be willing to develop and train people so that they can move into that leadership role. Some of the career planning measures that organizations can take are being aware of generational differences and creating a climate that will be engaging to all generations, identifying those differences so that we can focus on the strengths of each generation and how they can help the company, building skills with action learning assignments, business challenges, coaching and mentoring, having ongoing conversations through mentoring and networking, building relationships that focus on similarities, encouraging senior executives and faculty members to be clear about expectations and model appropriate behaviors, bring generations together for a common purpose, and then look for creative ways to change or customize benefits so that your company is a desirable place to work for all generations. One example I have of that is found in one organization that our annual incentive bonus was not something that Generation Y really valued. They're more used to immediate feedback, so we were able to change that incentive bonus to something quarterly. So those are some examples at an organization level of things that you can do to focus in on the generations. And keep in mind that Generation Y wants what we all want, to work with positive people, gain new knowledge and skills, work in a friendly environment, to be well paid, and to make a difference. There's a lot more information available, articles and books and resources out there. I mentioned the book Decades of Differences earlier. There are a couple of articles on AMA and Emerald Insights. And then the Z Career Planning Method is highlighted in the Challenging Career Choices article at cpp.com. So Kim, I'm going to turn it over to you for questions.
Okay, well, actually, if you could turn to the next slide for us, Sandra. Connect with us online. Make sure you follow us to keep up with the latest news, tips, and advice from our team of experts. And on the next slide, we are running a promotion for our webinar attendees. Spend $350 or more and receive a Typehead mug with a $25 Amazon gift card. Make sure to use the promo code OCT2014. The offer will expire Thursday, November 6th, and this is not valid on previous purchases with other promotional offers or on international orders. It is also one per customer only, and please note that when you place your order, you will receive the mug and gift card separately when your purchases are shipped. So don't fret if you don't see your mug and gift card with your purchases right away. On the next slide, please note that if you are an international customer and would like more information on our products and services, please go to cpp.com/global sales. If you haven't done so already, please check your email preferences by visiting cpp.com/email-press. Many of you don't receive our webinar invitations or follow-up emails because you are unsubscribed to our system, so please make sure that you are opted in. And on the next slide, please note that this webinar is eligible for 1.5 NBCC approved CE clock hours as well as the MBTI Master Practitioner credit. All certificate requests will incur a $7.95 plus tax processing fee. In order to qualify to purchase a certificate, you must meet the eligibility requirements as noted on the screen. To be eligible, our system must show that you attended the webinar for 1 hour or longer. The system will automatically track attendees by email and screen viewing time. If you are calling in and not viewing this on your screen, unfortunately you are not eligible as our system does not track phone calls. So we now have some time for questions, and I am going to read a few of the questions that came up a few slides back. So here is the first question. If millennials were raised in an era of unlimited information and data access, why would there be a disconnect between that and complex problem solving? Shouldn't the opposite be true?
I think that's a good question. You know, and I think that the access to the information and the resources, you know, knowing how to go Google information or find information, I find that in my experience, Generation Y is really good at that. Where I have seen in my own experience some of the breakdowns, it's perhaps not understanding some of the other boundaries on decision making, like, for example, authority levels. You know, perhaps not understanding that what their manager is asking for is a proposal, and that proposal needs to be approved before they move forward with it. You know, where I've seen some Generation Y employees make some missteps is gathering up all that information, putting it all together, making a decision, and moving forward, perhaps without the go-ahead. So with the critical thinking and the problem solving, where I have seen more of the missteps are around things like, do I really understand what my authority level here is? am I being asked to gather information and to put together a proposal that needs to be approved by one or more people? Or do I have the authority level to move forward with this action once I have all the information? Other kinds of boundaries, sometimes where there are missteps, is not understanding key stakeholders that need to be involved in the decision, and that perhaps within large organizations more often we have multiple departments that may be impacted in some way by a decision. So it may be critical thinking tools around thinking through the organization structure and who are the key people and who needs to be involved, who's going to help support this change, who might prevent it, what might get in the way, thinking through some of the barriers that might get in the way of my success. So more often than not, it's not the information, and it's not maybe even that it's a bad decision. It may be that perhaps not all the appropriate parties have been involved, or not all of the appropriate approvals have been given, or perhaps the format or the process that I've shared the information isn't exactly what was expected. Organizations vary. A more formal hierarchical organization may expect a formal PowerPoint presentation with charts and graphs and data prior to moving forward. A more informal organization, it might be that you could send an idea to your manager with a couple of sentences and it might be approved. But those are the areas where Generation Y really needs help thinking through their approach. And if Plan A, their first approach, doesn't work, or they hit a barrier, going back to the drawing board and being able to think through Plan B or alternative approaches to the situation.
Okay, thank you. And we have another question. If you could suggest some critical thinking tools that you had mentioned previously.
Mm-hmm. There's actually a training program that I attended some time ago. It was about 2 to 3 years ago when it was just being piloted, that's offered by Executive Development Associates and in partnership with Pearson. And I believe it's 2 days. And so if you're looking for a training program as an offering, that's one that I could highly recommend. Some of the kinds of tools that they talk about in that program are things like a spreadsheet planning tool to really think through key stakeholders and to think through different alternatives and possible barriers that might come up to solutions. And so there are a number of different tools and techniques that are out there. I also mentioned quality improvement programs within organizations oftentimes have a suite of quality improvement tools that can be useful. There's one that's called an A3 that's used in multiple organizations. If you think about Six Sigma programs or quality improvement programs, it's just a decision-making tool that helps someone think through the current situation, the desired future state, and put together an action plan.
All right, we have a question. How are the generational differences affected by the technical/scientific training of the individuals?
I think that comes into play with learning styles. I think if we think about our school system and the way that people were taught in school, even in grade school or high school, when I think back to my own grade school experience, I don't remember having computers in my grade school, and now, you see kids in kindergarten that have access to computers. So I think that the way that we are taught, the way that we learn, the technology that we've grown up with certainly impacts our learning style and the way that we communicate with others.
All right, thank you. And we now have multi-generational and cultural diversity. Have you coached with such a group?
You know, I don't think I have combined those two things in one particular situation. I can't think of a situation that comes into mind in terms of the cultural and the generational differences where it was combined. There certainly is an overlay there. I mean, you could certainly overlay a number of different lenses in terms of diversity. You've got diversity with different personality styles. You've got your diversity with the different generations, and then you've got the different cultures. I have worked in global organizations, and so I have done some training and coaching around how to operate in different cultures in terms of how people might operate or what the expectations might be if you go to work within a different country, for example, or the example that we mentioned earlier, simple things like what's expected when you turn in your presentation. Is it expected to be in U.S. English or UK English? Those are the kind of real simple things that sometimes need to be clarified up front when you're working with a global environment so that people don't make cultural mishaps.
Okay, and we have a question and comment really. Much of this lecture is geared towards millennials that are currently students. Is there research or guidelines out there for millennials that are 5 to 7 years into their career?
I think a lot of the same skills really apply, and the same tools and same process. You know, if I think about the career planning framework and think about those 4 puzzle pieces, that can apply to anybody at any level in their career, helping them think through their interests. So given that they have 5 to 7 years of work experience, they've learned some things. What are they interested in doing now? And what are the skills that they are really good at, and what are those that they need to develop to get to the next level, perhaps in their career or within the organization. So I think that the same tools can be applied at different levels of experience, but your conversation with them might be a bit different. Your student or your person with little experience who's just entering an organization, I think it's going to have different questions. They're going to have different goals and different interests. Certainly 5 to 7 years into the work environment and into their experience, if they're within an organization that they've been in that entire time, they should have a pretty good understanding of the culture by that point. So I think you can apply the same tools, but the way that you have the conversation may lead them to a different decision. So they're really looking at perhaps the next step in their career, and a lot of it at that point may be around engaging them and retaining them in the organization, because some of the research shows that Generation X and Generation Y tend not to be as loyal to the company. So if we're not growing and developing them within the organization, we're not having these conversations, they're going to be inclined to look either across the organization or outside the organization. So using those tools to have a good, thorough conversation and using the engagement questions can really help.
Okay, I did want to mention we're getting a lot of questions about the CEUs. Please note that if you have attended the webinar for 1 or more hours, you will automatically receive an email with the information to purchase by tomorrow. So be on the lookout for that. And also that was what was mentioned about making sure that you are opted into our emails through cpp.com/email prep. Now I have a comment here. just thinking about one of the last questions that we reviewed, it may be the case that the information prevents the natural development of connections that can be more easily developed when the data points are fewer and less complex. Alternatively, the proliferation of information makes filtering out of irrelevant noise more challenging, reducing critical thinking and problem solving. Sandra, do you have anything to add or comment to that one?
Actually, I think that's a great point. You know, personality preference could come into play here as well. Especially depending on their personality preference, it may be very easy to get overwhelmed with information and conflicting information that may be available out there. Being able to effectively take in that information, but then focus in on key decision-making points, key information, or identify themes in the information, you know, maybe something that is also helpful if there is a topic or a project that a Generation Y person has been given, and there's a variety of information out there. Just like the research on the generations, there are tons and tons of books available. So it's taking all that information and trying to manage the information and boil it down into some key themes or common themes, and then make a decision.
We have a question from Thomas here. How might you handle a classroom/project team that is mixed generational? Focus is on assignments, communication methods, codes of conduct.
So a project team with multi-generations, I think, you know, one of the first, you know, key meetings or key conversations to have with that team would be identifying roles on the team. So, you know, if it's a team that perhaps it would be appropriate to have someone volunteer to take the lead, I think, you know, first having a conversation about roles on the team, who's going to be the leader of the project assignment, and what their role is going to be. You might also have someone to be responsible for taking notes or scheduling meetings. But I think the first conversation needs to center around roles and then methods for operating. So just like with any team, you know, and let's say, for example, you have a Generation Y person that offers to be the lead on a multi-generation team, being clear that if they are the lead, they are going to help move the team forward, you know, facilitate the meetings with the team, lead that team towards the end result or the end proposal that's expected, and then, you know, perhaps assign others in the group to help take notes, to play other roles on the team. There might be sub-teams that go out to research particular aspects of the project. But I think the first step is in bringing that team together is being very clear about roles, who's the leader of the team, what their role is, how often the team will meet, how they will communicate, and then allowing that team to move forward and talk about things like operating norms. You know, when we come together, if we have a disagreement, this is how we're going to resolve it, and how we're going to work together, and facilitating agreement around that, along with the project timeline and results that are expected.
Okay, and we've had a few questions in regards to, do you have an example or template or resource for the career development planning action?
I could certainly share an example template. I'm not certain the easiest way to do that. I mean, I can certainly share an example template. I can send that back to CPP, and then maybe that's something that CPP could post or have available to those that attended the webinar today. But there are a lot of different templates out there that you could potentially use, and you could also think about customizing something, for your particular organization. But I think the key things to include are those 4 elements of the career puzzle. What are they interested in? What's their style? What are their values? What are the skills, experiences that they want to develop? And then specific action plans. So in terms of looking at their current situation and where they want to be, what are the steps that they can take within the next 1 to 2 years? And then looking down the road, you could also look long-term at a 3 to 5 year plan. So I'd be happy to share an example, if that's something, Kim, that you can make available through CPP.
Yes, we will send that up in our follow-up email. So we will provide that to all of the attendees. And we have a comment here from Barbara, she says, this all jives with my experience dealing with Gen Y, and thank you for the confirmation in regards to your content in the webinar, Sandra. So
well, I'm glad that you found it valuable, so thank you so much for that comment.
Yeah, and we'd like to thank everyone for attending and asking so many excellent questions, and thank you again, Sandra, for being with us to share your knowledge and expertise today. Please join us for our upcoming webinar on December 4th, which will be From Preferences to Success, Using the MBTI Type for Student and Employee Success. Registration will be open soon. Visit our website, cpp.com/askanexpert for details. Remember to also check out the same site to find all of our previously recorded webinars as well as this one in the next few days. Thank you all for attending and have a wonderful day. Thank you.